Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slasher U, a college football podcast here at Slasher Sports. I'm your host, Christian Rao, riding solo today, as you'll get Steve Beck tomorrow. He's going to be on the show Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and of course, on our Saturday morning special for the college football side. And of course, there'll be so much more content coming your way here in the upcoming weeks. We'll be sure to get you notified and let you know as soon as we decide to release what's next for Slasher U. A lot of great things coming up. But today we're going to talk about, we're going to do a segment that I want to do on Tuesdays called 10 Question Tuesday. We're going to take 10 questions that across the college football land, some questions that I think that need to be answered, or some that are just a dying question that many people are asking across the United States in the college football world. So we're going to get to that. So before we do that, before we get to question one, I just like to thank you for joining in. If you're listening in the podcast form or watching on YouTube, and wherever you're listening, please like, subscribe, and comment. It really goes a long way. And if you are listening in the podcast world, give us a rating as well. It really helps out and gives us a good look on the algorithms. We want to get Slasher U out to as many people as we possibly can. All right, without further ado, let's dig in to question number one.
Question 1. With a Minnesota loss and a Purdue win, what does this mean for the Big Ten West?
That is a really interesting question. I think right off the bat is what is going on with this Big Ten West? And when you think about this division, especially this conference, let alone the division, you initially think of the big teams in the East and how they really could make a big run for the college football playoffs. The Big Ten West has an opportunity to spoil one of those teams or two in the Big Ten championship game. Minnesota seemed like a shoo-in after their win against Michigan State a few weeks back, but then Purdue comes in and in Purdue spoiler maker fashion beat Minnesota. And now I'm not one that's going to throw away my rowboat right away or my row to the boat. Not going to do that. I still have faith in Minnesota. I think they're still going to be a really good football team. PJ Fleck really knows what he's doing over in Minnesota. On the other hand, Purdue is a team that won 9 wins last year. A lot of people like to think that Purdue is just not a team that is deserving to have the top spot in the Big Ten West. Well, I hate to break it to you, but this team has what it takes. However, neither of those two teams are a team that I think that will ultimately end up at the top of the Big Ten West. My pick is Illinois. Did you see what they did to Wisconsin last week? It was incredible. And this team looks really good, 4-1 sitting right now. And if you look at the rest of their schedule, and we'll dig into that in a little bit here, but if you look at the rest of the schedule, they have a really good shot at posting a great record that will put them in contention to win the Big Ten West. So I think all three of those teams are definitely the front runners out of the Big Ten West. When you look at Minnesota, you look at Purdue, and then obviously Purdue is above Minnesota now with that tiebreaker. And then you can't count out Illinois. I'm sorry, I don't think you can count them out yet. I think they really have what it takes to make that step up. You know, you look at the other teams, Iowa, you want to kind of get them in the loop, but after their loss to Michigan, now obviously Michigan's a Big Ten East team, but that loss, I think, definitely exposed them on some assets. And although their defense is top notch, I don't think that offense can get them far enough to win this division. If I had to put money down today on who I thought would win the Big Ten West, I'm going to go with Illinois. I think Illinois is that team that can do it. I think Minnesota can be close, and I think Purdue can be close. But I think Illinois is the team that can sneak through. All right, let's go. Question number 2.
Question 2. Why are most fans still dismissing Clemson?
Great question. Once again, I don't know. Steve and I have been talking about this for weeks now, since the season began, that there's been a lot of disrespect against the Clemson Tigers. And I really have no idea. There was some possibility that most of the disrespect came from, well, obviously they didn't win the ACC championship last year. Pitt won. They still wound up getting ranked at the end of the year. I believe they were 14th at the end of the season last year. DJ, the quarterback, did not play good whatsoever last season. 9 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. That is not the case this year. And in the last 2 weeks, we saw them beat a very good Wake Forest team in Wake Forest and then continue their big winning streak in Clemson against North Carolina State, a top 10 team. The first time ever North Carolina played another top 5 team. Clemson took care of business in great fashion, might I add. I don't know why people are still sleeping on Clemson. Now, the AP's not. They still have in the top 5 ranking, but you still see so many people across college football land giving Clemson just not the benefit of the doubt. The ACC is a lot more tough than people give it credit for, especially the Atlantic. And Clemson's at the top, and I don't see that changing anytime soon, especially after the win against North Carolina State. Clemson is a football team that we could see be in the college football playoffs and win a semifinal game and make it to the national championship game, and I wouldn't bat an eye, regardless of who they played in that first round. You give me an Alabama, give me an Ohio State, give me a Georgia, Michigan, whatever it is. I think they could win the national championship this year and wouldn't be surprised in the slightest. That's how much faith I have in Dabo Swinney. That's how much faith I have in that Clemson defense that is still improving week by week after losing Bretton Venables last year. It's showing that the Clemson defense still has what it takes. I like Clemson football here. I am not shocked in the slightest that they won that football game against NC State. And I think they're going to keep chugging along. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're undefeated by the end of the season. All right, here we go. Question number 3.
Question 3. After a big win over Baylor, are the Pokes your favorite for the Big 12 title?
It's hard to say no. It is really hard to say no to not think that Oklahoma State is my favorite for the Big Ten championship. But as we've talked about week in and week out on the show, the Big 12 is so deep. I think the only teams that I would be concerned about right now is West Virginia. But West Virginia could come in and beat almost all of the other Big 12 teams any given day. Now, I think there was a stat that was going out this week, and there's a couple, I think 4 Big 12 games this week, and all of them except one include a ranked team somewhere. The only game that doesn't include an unranked team is Oklahoma and Texas. How about that? If you had that on your bingo card this year, thinking that once we got to the Oklahoma-Texas game, both those teams be unranked, I'd be shocked. That game is going to be very interesting once we get to Texas and Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma still has a great team. I think that's just not the team that they've expected. I think they have an opportunity to win this football game. Quinn Ewers is supposed to return back for Texas. We saw what Quinn Ewers did in the first quarter against Alabama. If it is anything like we saw with Quinn Ewers in that first quarter against Alabama, watch out Oklahoma State, watch out Baylor, watch out the rest of the Big Ten, because I think Texas can come and take over and win this entire thing, the entire Big 12, if Texas has a top-notch Quinn Ewers. I really do think that that's the possibilities here. I was skeptical at the beginning of the season about how much disrespect Baylor was given after the game last week against Oklahoma State. Some was warranted. Now, Baylor put up a good show. They had some turnovers at the end of the game trying to throw the ball where they didn't have any need to throw the ball, but they were trying to make plays to get up in the score and get back into the football game. So some of the stat lines don't look the greatest. Oklahoma State is a good football team. They have Sanders, who arguably should be in the Heisman race if he's not already. I like the Pokes, but don't sleep on Texas. Don't sleep on some of these other teams either. I mean, the Kansas Jayhawks, undefeated. TCU, undefeated. We're going to see that game. We're going to see that matchup this week, college game day matchup. That one should be very interesting. I'm fascinated by that matchup. I think we can really see a good taste of what the rest of Big 12 play is going to look like after watching Kansas versus TCU. We saw what TCU did to Oklahoma last week, and I'm still sleeping on half the teams in the Big 12. Didn't even talk about Kansas State, but right now, I'm going to say Oklahoma State is my favorite team in the Big 12. I want you to say don't sleep on Texas. I think that they have a prime opportunity to really make a move and find their way into that title game. I think we're going to have a Big 12 champion with 2 losses, maybe even 3. Now, that might hurt them in the college football playoffs, but that's still fun football to me. All right, here we go. Question number 4.
Question 4. Who will be the next coach to be fired?
I feel like I've been saying this over and over again, so I feel like this question is going to be really short. I am so surprised that after 5 coaches have been fired, not one of them have been Brian Harsin from Auburn. I am completely shocked that he still has a job. Now, a lot of reports are coming out stating that he's going to get fired during the bye week. That means he has to go in and face Georgia, who has not looked too great the last 2 weeks. So you'd have to expect that they're probably on a crazy rebound game, ready to really prove the rest of the nation why they need that number 1 spot back. And then against Ole Miss the next week before their bye, who we just saw take care of Kentucky. Now, the game could have easily changed Kentucky if they wouldn't have turned the ball over, but Ole Miss beat Kentucky and is just outside the top 5 in the AP standings. I'm just really confused on when Brian Harsin's going to go. We heard that there was a possibility that in the game against Missouri, was it, when he won in overtime, that there was a possibility that if he lost, he'd be fired right then and there. But he won, so they stuck around. If the thought is that Harsin was going to get fired during the loss, that means that they knew that they have seen all they've seen with Brian Harsin. They're done. So if you are already ready to move on, if he just loses one more game, which by the way he did against LSU in awful fashion, was leading and then LSU came back and still has a job. But if you've seen all you've seen with Brian Harsin, just bite the bullet, move on. With what we've seen so far, with Power 5 teams making firing, you have to make the assumption that the transfer portal comes into play a lot more. NLI deals are coming into NIL deals are coming into play a lot more, to where you make a move as soon as possible. So not only your boosters can get that notification, that nod saying, okay, we're taking that step in the next direction. You know how Auburn boosters are, especially in this Harsin situation, who arguably Brian Harsin was set up to fail from the beginning. That's a whole nother story, though. But you make that move right away, so you can make the next step. As an SEC coach or SEC team, you want to get the top-notch coach before any of these other Power 5 schools get the opportunity to do so. You get your first pickings because you need to find a way to get back to the supremacy of the SEC, which we have seen at one point as Auburn. And these Auburn fans don't like when they're not a 10-win football team. Not especially when their rival Alabama is in the college football playoffs every single year. I'm surprised it's not Brian Harsin. If I had to put another one in there too, I think Louisville's coach Satterfield might be out the door soon, especially after that loss against Boston College. But that one's a little far-fetched for me right now. I think there might be a little bit on the horizon there. But to me, Brian Harsin, I guess this wasn't as quick of an answer that I thought, but that Brian Harsin for sure. All right, here we go. Question number 5.
Question 5. Who has been the most disappointing team so far this season?
Well, if you look at the graphic, there are 3 people, or 3 teams, I should say, that are in that: Michigan State, Wisconsin, and Oklahoma. And I think if you were going to put them in a category of who are the most disappointing teams, if you're not mentioning those 3, then I don't know if you're really having the conversation. Michigan State has been absolutely dreadful. We just put out a conversation yesterday how we think it might be a bad decision that they made the contract extension with Mel Tucker. After going 11-1 last season, now they're 2-3, 0-2 in Big Ten play. Getting a lot of negative comments on that one, which I say bring on. Go ahead. That's fine by me. I appreciate your opinions. But, with that being said, Michigan State obviously is taking a step back. I still think it has something to do with recruiting, especially after Mel Tucker being in year 3 of his tenure there. So I would say that there are definitely some issues with Michigan State. Big disappointment. You look at Wisconsin. They just fired their coach. If you don't think that means that there's been a disappointing season, that was a shock to a lot of people. I mean, even it was a shock to Pat Fitzgerald, the head coach of Northwestern, who arguably for some reason still has a job. I think Northwestern just knows that this is probably the best they can get right now. Pat Fitzgerald's a great coach, don't get me wrong, but even he said he was shocked. I think Wisconsin is definitely a disappointing team. But if you didn't say Oklahoma was the most disappointing team, I think that you might have to reevaluate what you think of disappointment. You start off sixth in the nation. You lose to Kansas State, which you thought that was something in the past. Brent Venables apparently inherits that as well, that they have problems with Kansas State. Kansas State seems to be the kryptonite of the Sooners. And then you go into TCU, or you go to play TCU, and TCU just puts the hurt on the Sooners. And that just can't happen. As much as I do think that Oklahoma is still a good football team, they're disappointing. They're just not performing the way they should. And I think that, especially this week, if they find a way to not defeat the Texas Longhorns and they go on a 3-game losing streak, we might see some drastic changes happen with Oklahoma, something that they might regret in the future because they didn't let it pan out. Now, I'm not saying it might be something as crazy as the Brent Venables firing, but I feel like something will have to happen. Not sure if it'll be that drastic. Maybe a coordinator might move, something in that regards. Who knows? I don't think Brent Venables' job is in danger by any means. In the beginning of this segment, I said Mel Tucker, maybe they shouldn't have that extension. He's in year 3. Brent Venables is in year 1. I mean, year 0.5. So it's not his team yet. Even with the transfer portal where you can bring in players, it's not his team yet. So I would say Oklahoma is the most disappointing team. However, have faith. Relax, Sooners. You'll be okay. All right, here we go. Question number 6.
Question 6. At this point in the season, should every undefeated team be ranked in the top 25?
You look at this graphic, you see Coastal Carolina and James Madison, right? There are 16 teams that are undefeated right now in college football. 14 of them are in the top 25. 14 of them are Power 5 conferences. The only 2 that are not ranked and the only 2 that are not Power 5 are James Madison and Coastal Carolina. So in my mind, there's not only a bias between the Associated Press and their top 25, but there is a huge disregard to the skill and the respect of going undefeated 5 weeks in the season. We're at week 6, and we saw Coastal Carolina and James Madison. Now, James Madison is just coming up from FCS. We thought they might be Team 131, a UConn or a UMass, right? This defense has been absolutely amazing. We're seeing them undefeated and taking FBS by storm. I think that every single team, if you are undefeated, especially after week 5, deserves to be in the top 25. If you want to say, well, they put Cincinnati in the top 25, they're not biased. Okay, why is Cincinnati in the top 25 and not James Madison? Cincinnati has no place in the top 25. I'm sorry, not this year. They're a rebuilding team. They're young. They started off in the top 25, but their wins, no thanks. No, I got no place for Cincinnati in my top 25. Not yet. They have to do a lot more to keep me entertained. I think that they have still a good shot to win the American. I think that is easily doable in the mind of Cincinnati, even in a down year for that team. But I don't think they deserve to be in the top 25 whatsoever. I think that really needs to be evaluated and looked at. The AP is a joke. Let's be honest. In the grand scheme of things, it's a joke. I mean, really, even the coaches poll's a joke. None of this system is the best thing in the world. But that's what we have to go off of, so it gives us something to talk about. The fact that JMU and Coastal Carolina are not ranked top 25 is bizarre. If they win again this week and they go undefeated again, they better be in the top 25. There's an opportunity that both these teams could go undefeated until the last week of the year. And why do I think that one of them might not? Because they play each other last week of the year, both in the Sun Belt. Welcome to the Sun Belt, by the way, for both those teams. All right, here we go. Question number 7.
Question 7. Has football caught up with Jimbo Fisher and his offensive style?
I mean, I think so. I really think so. I mean, you talk about, you've seen it across social medias and other sports podcasts that talk about the milk jug, expiration date of 2014. If this was milk, what would you do? Throw it away? Well, if this was an offensive style, Jimbo Fisher says expiration 2014, what should you do? You should throw it away. I think it's a great analogy. I think that's absolutely, it's from the late kick. I think that is a great analogy because that's exactly what we're looking at. Jimbo Fisher has an offensive style that really needs to be reevaluated. He has another one of those crazy contracts with a huge buyout. I believe it's in the $80 million range for a buyout. He's not going anywhere anytime soon either. But what they can do is relinquish his play calling abilities. Bring in another offensive coordinator or let his offensive coordinator run the plays. Take away that from him because that is not working out in Texas A&M fashion. He was supposed to be the fixer, the Bob Stoops of Texas A&M, if you will. He was supposed to come in and bring them back to their glory lands. Really, right now, it only seems like the best that Texas A&M can do is win 9 games under a Jimbo Fisher era. And that is just not good enough, especially in SEC play. You want to find a way to get to the college football playoffs. Even when it's expanded, 9 wins might not be enough. Might not be enough for an at-large bid because it's obviously not enough for a conference championship, not in the SEC. So I think that there's definitely some thought saying that college football has caught up to Jimbo Fisher. I think that is absolutely a good way to assess that and look at that for real. I think Jimbo Fisher really needs to take a good look in the mirror and decide, does he want to win football games or how does he want to seal his legacy? Because right now, his offense is what's holding them back. They have an injured quarterback this week as well, going against Alabama, and that's not going to help his offensive production at all. At all. I think this game is about to be a blowout, and we're going to hear more about this Jimbo Fisher talk here after this week. All right, here we go. Question number 8.
Question 8. Are we finally seeing a higher level of competition at the top of the Pac-12?
Yes, we are. And how great does it feel to finally get some more competition in the Pac-12? We've always usually had like 1 or 2 teams, maybe a third would pop in, but then the next year that team would fall off and maybe one would sneak back up. This year we have seen some great play. I would say from 6 teams in the Pac-12. USC has been outstanding. UCLA under Chip Kelly has really taken off. At the beginning, it was a little shaky with Chip Kelly, but this year has been outstanding. UCLA looks really good. I was a little skeptical at the beginning of the season when they kept winning. Some of those wins were not that great. Last week, they proved me wrong. Oregon, after their blowout loss to Georgia, has really been on the up and up. And that's been the same with Utah as well. They lost to Florida week 1, and then every week they seem to get better and keep stepping up. Oregon and Utah are in that same boat to me. They both really look like teams that are just improving week by week, and then you see them ranked once again, and they deserve to be ranked. Then you got Washington and Washington State. And, Penix has been absolutely amazing for UW. He has been so fun. He's resurrected his career there. It's been so fun to watch. That football game last week with the loss, yeah, that was unfortunate, but Washington is still a team that you need to watch out for. And then Washington State, yeah, they beat Wisconsin. That might not be as great of a win as we thought that it was moving forward in the grand scheme of things once we look back at season's end, but they are really exciting too. All 6 of these teams are someone who you could say that if you looked right now and said, could you see team A, team B, and then placed any of those 6 teams in one of those slots and say in the Pac-12 championship, I think you have to say yes. Right off the bat, I think UCLA and USC are the front runners right now for the Pac-12 championship. I love that they don't have the conferences anymore. It's just top 2 go. I think all conferences should do that. The division thing, I'm kind of over it. I'm over the division thing. Give us the top 2 teams in each, especially when we're looking at the ACC Coastal or the Big Ten West. Give us the top 2, right? But with the Pac-12, I'm glad they finally did that. It seems like it's going to work out for them. It looks like we're getting more high, top-notch football because of that. All right, here we go. We're almost done. Question number 9.
Question 9. Now that Kansas is ranked, Illinois now holds the crown for the longest drought in the top 25 as a Power 5 school. Do they make it into the rankings this season?
It was really cool to see Kansas finally break that drought and get in the top 25. Really 1 week too late. They should have been ranked the week before, but it's over. The drought is over. As someone who knows about the droughts, right? Wearing a Seattle Mariners hat right now. As a Buffalo Bills fan growing up, I know about droughts. It is good in the land of Kansas that they have finally got that one over. With an end of one drought means another one becomes the longest. And that's not something you want to have the title for. Illinois receives 6 votes to get into the top 25. If you look at the other people receiving votes at the bottom of the AP 25, Illinois receives 6. So they're right there. They have the opportunity to do it. Illinois has looked really good this year. Other than their 3-point loss to Indiana, they have looked really good. This is where I think Illinois has the opportunity to prove that they can be a top 25 team and really a competitor, as I said earlier, for the Big Ten West. This week, I think, is the statement game, and it's against Iowa. It's in Illinois. It's against Iowa. We saw Iowa put up a decent show against Michigan, ultimately lost the football game. Iowa's going to come hungry for a win. Illinois just came off a great win against Wisconsin, was the reason Paul Chryst was fired. They're coming in 4-1. They're coming in initially right now as a 4-point favorite in that football game. If they beat Illinois, then they got to go row the boat and play Minnesota. Tough 2 teams. Tough 2 weeks. Tough 2 teams. Then Nebraska, who their offense is starting to step up a little bit, but Nebraska is still that team that fired their coach as well this year. So obviously we know the woes of Nebraska this season. Then Michigan State, who I feel like I've talked about already enough on this show. Purdue, another tough one. Head to Michigan and then end the season with Northwestern. There is a possibility, not saying it's likely because they have a tough schedule ahead, but there is a possibility that this team could go 10-2, assuming that they lose to Michigan. They can beat Iowa. They can beat Minnesota. They can beat Purdue. And that's what it would take for you to win the Big Ten West. You still have a long road ahead of you. Right now, I think Purdue is the front runner because of their win over Minnesota. But you have a long road ahead of you. But it's completely doable. It's completely doable. And if you find a way to go 10-2, and your only losses are to Indiana on a field goal that it was a weird loss at the beginning of the year, sure, and then to a team in Michigan who is going to arguably possibly be in the college football playoffs, I'd take that. I'd take that by far. And a 10-win team is going to be ranked in the top 25. I think if they beat Iowa and Minnesota, if they win the next 2, they'd be ranked. So I think there is an absolute possibility that we see them head into their bye week after Minnesota. If they can win out the next 2 games, move to 6-1, they're a ranked football team. I don't think the win against Iowa does it just yet, unless we have too many unranked teams bounce out. I think they're close, unless they win in crazy fashion against the Iowa defense. But give me 2 wins, one against Iowa, one against Minnesota. I think that streak breaks. Then we got a new person to look out in the drought. I think that's Rutgers, if I remember correctly. We'll have to look back. But I think Rutgers is definitely on the list. I just don't know if they're next in line. All right, here we go. Number 10.
Question 10. What head coaching vacancy is the most appealing?
Well, we got 5 to choose from. You got Colorado, Arizona State in the Pac-12. You got 2 in the Big Ten with Nebraska and Wisconsin. And then you have Georgia Tech in the ACC. I feel like if you read this question and you don't put any thought in it, the first team that comes to your mind right away would be Wisconsin. Wisconsin and Georgia Tech, might I add, I guess you could put Nebraska in this conversation as well, have interesting regions or interesting types of restrictions when it comes to recruiting. So if you think that the recruiting might be an issue, that might not be so appealing to you. That might be something that hurts the appeal of that coaching job. Now, granted, Wisconsin has a great thing going for them. If they can be successful and They have been in the past. We've seen them in Big Ten championship games. We've seen them win conference championship games. We usually see them win their bowl game, but they know how to recruit in their area and then hopefully bring up a few skilled players to get around their big guys and then go compete in the Big Ten. Nebraska, that's a whole other story right now. After the whole Bo Bellini thing, whole other story. Georgia Tech has some issues with academic requirements that makes it tough for them to recruit some of those top players in the pipeline that UGA or Georgia Southern or Alabama or Florida can go ahead and recruit. I think that if you want to make Georgia Tech a more appealing place for a coach to work and compete at and try and be successful against tough teams like the Bulldogs and the rest of the ACC at that note, you have to either take back those academic restrictions a little bit, make them a little more lenient, or get rid of them and level the playing field with the rest of the ACC, rest of the SEC like Georgia, their in-state rival. You look out west, you have Arizona State and Colorado. I think those teams are appealing if you are a culture-changing coach. If you know that that's just something that just has to happen. You know, I think of like a Bronco Mendenhall from University of Virginia, what he did in Virginia. He changed the culture, made Virginia relevant again. And we're seeing it with Kansas right now. I mean, we're seeing it with Kansas right now. So that's who I see. Those kind of, if I had to pick an appealing team, though, I think I would circle back and say Wisconsin because of the success that they've had in the past. It's that alone helps you recruiting, just knowing that that's a possibility. Boosters are higher. You're in a really good conference in the Big Ten. It's only going to get better or should get better with the addition of UCLA and USC. So that's who I would pick. If I had to put them in order, we'll play that game real quick before we get out of here. Wisconsin 1. I'm going to say Colorado 2 because I feel like there is nowhere to go but up with Colorado. So I'm going to put Colorado at 2 for most appealing. Then I'm going to go to Nebraska because I think Nebraska is almost in the same boat. Then Georgia Tech, then Arizona State. I think Arizona State's going to be a tough one. Everybody calls them the sleeping giant, but it just hasn't worked out in a very long time. And with some allegations happening, how they handled Herm Edwards, I think that's going to not only hurt recruiting, but it's going to hurt bringing in a coach because they might not like how that was handled. So I think Arizona State's going to have the hardest time so far out of these 5 college teams. Now, as we talked about earlier on the show, Brian Harson's fired, or if he's fired, when he's fired, that will be the most appealing by far. SEC, Auburn, a team that is known to be a top-notch football team. Now you're going to have the most heat on you from the start, right away. It won't be you're in year 1. It's okay, Brent Venables of Oklahoma. No, it'll be right off the bat. But definitely the most appealing, and it will capture some top-notch candidates. All right, thanks for joining me on this 10-question Tuesday. This was great. We're going to do this every week. Thanks for joining. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment. Let me know your thoughts on these questions. And if you have a question for me and for the show, we'll go ahead and put it on 10-Question Tuesday or on our Saturday morning special show. Go ahead and hit us up on Twitter at @SlasherSports, or you can email us at slashersportsu@gmail.com. Thank you so much. That's going to wrap it up. We'll be back here tomorrow. Steve's going to join me back here. We're going to do a little bit of Wild Card Wednesday. We'll give you some more topics, get you ready for your college football week. Until then, we'll be back here tomorrow. Take care.